Welcome to the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we'll be updating the quantities in our shopping cart when we add or remove something from the cart. It sounds easy, but it's actually going to take a bit of work. Along the way, you're going to see why having separate models is important for the various layers. Now, if you're a Patreon supporter at the $5 per month level or higher, make sure you head over to get the latest source code. Either way, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can follow along. And finally, as you think of suggestions, please leave them down in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts on this course. Let me know when I messed up. Let me know when you want to see something different or added, or you are curious about a feature. Your feedback definitely makes this application better. All right, let's start into our source code. I have a few things open. Let's close them all from last time. All right, this is the Timco Retail Manager course. If we go over to our changes here, we should see no changes, meaning I haven't changed anything since last time. If we go to sync and do a fetch, there should be no changes there either because I haven't pushed anything to GitHub since we last worked on this. Okay, let's actually start by running the application and just seeing what the problem is. So we'll bring the login form over here. Remember from last time, we hard-coded the username and password just to make it easier for testing purposes. So if I have a 10-inch skillet, notice quantity 10, and I say add to cart, it says 1 skillet. I say add to cart again, it says 2 skillets, but notice the quantity 10 hasn't changed. And remember, this is actually a hack. We did something to make this work, but it's not pretty. So let's fix that. Let's make it so that this quantity changes whenever you add something to the cart, and this hack is no longer needed. So the problem is, and let's open up the view model for that and go down to where that hack is, right here. So the hack right now is we remove the item from the cart and then add it again, which is kind of ugly, especially since when you remove something from the cart and add it again, it actually changes the order. I didn't really show that, but if you, and let's just do that while I'm talking, but if you add something to the cart, add something else to the cart, it can like flip the order around. So if I say add a skillet to the cart, add some towels to the cart, now let's add another skillet, notice skillet's now on bottom. If I add another fluffy bath towel, now fluffy bath towel is down on bottom. And so that's kind of ugly and not the greatest user interface experience. And if we enable this remove cart button, the same thing's going to happen in reverse. We're going to remove things from the cart but not update the quantities here either. So that's not right. So how do we fix this? Well, when we initially did it, we said there should be a better way of doing this. And the answer is, yeah, there is. Down here in these models need to say, hey, I've changed. And they don't have any notify of property change event. And if we add that, well, we've got to add a few things. We've got to add caliber and micro then to our library because we've got to have that. Notice this model right here has the screen, and that's where the notify of property change comes from, is that property changed base. So we'd have to add caliber and micro into our library, and we have to modify these models. And these models are what come from, they map the data over from our API. So we probably don't want to do that. So how do we go about changing this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to add new models to our user interface that are user interface models. So I'm going to create one that is I have the option here. I can do just the product model. It's really the only one that we have to map. Well, we're going to do both. So we'll do a cart item model too. I don't have to map them both, and we'll get to the mapping in just a minute, but I have to at least have a cart item model and a product model. Because notice inside cart item model is the product model. let's call this cart item display model. And I'll make it public. And we're going to copy all of these properties over. And I know that probably right now you're twitching and saying, well, why would we ever do that? Well, we're going to get to that in a minute, but essentially, we're going to change this model to be a bit different. Now, I'm not going to map product model. I'm actually going to call it product display model. And then I'll copy this and create a model called product display model. And make it public. And then come down here to product model and do the exact same thing. Copy and paste all the properties. I don't have to copy and paste all of them if I'm not going to use all of them. But for right now, I'll just copy and paste all of them. Okay, so now we're set up with two new models, cart item display model and product display model. And cart item display model has inside of it a product display model. What we're going to do is we're going to map over to these models. We're going to say we're going to use these models. Now, we haven't changed anything yet. We haven't enabled any way for us to say, hey, we're going to notify if property changed. And that's where we're going to add in an I notify property changed. So on cart item display model, we're going to implement an interface I notify of property changed. Control dot to add a using statement. Using system.component model. And it's not notify of, it's notify property change. Notice how smart this is. The Visual Studio is getting amazing. It said, hey, you know what? You typed that wrong. It's I notify property changed, not I notify of property changed. But I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. Are you talking about I notify property change? And if so, let's change that and add the using statement for it. And yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Now, if I control dot here, it'll implement the interface, which is just one event, property changed event handler. Okay, so now I just need to fire this event off whenever a property changes. Well, how do I do that? Well, let's start by coming into this here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to copy the name. Quantity in cart. I'm going to wipe it out and make it a full property. Prop full. Quantity in cart. Like so. That makes it easier. Okay, so now I have a full property. Now what I can do is in my set, I can call this property changed. Well, to do that, whoops, I somehow lost my curly brace. To do that, what I need to do is I need to do a property changed, and then a question mark dot invoke. This is going to invoke the event and say this, and then new property change event args, and pass in the property name, which would be name of quantity in cart. And that's a lot of syntax, but that's how you would do it. But what you can do is make that syntax a little easier. So public void property changed, let's call it call property changed. Call property changed and string property name. Like so. And then we can just copy this right here and paste it in here, and then just in here, paste in the property name. What does that do for us? It changes this whole call down to this right here. Call property changed, name of quantity in cart. Makes it a simpler call, right? So now we can notify whenever the quantity in cart changes. But notice also display text should be changed as well. So we're going to do display text. Now, you may notice I'm using the I notify of property change, not notify of property change, which is what Caliburn. I'm sorry, I'm using I notify property change, not notify of. There's no of. I'm using I notify property change instead of what we do over here, which is notify of property change, which is a Caliburn micro thing. However, the I notify property change is it's something from .NET. It's not something that is specific to Caliburn Micro. What that means is anybody can use it, and we don't have to have Caliburn Micro installed or referenced in order to use this. We could put this in our class library if you wanted to, but I'm keeping that class library separate so I can reuse it again somewhere else without having to have these in there or modify it further. So now I have I notify property change. So that's going to handle the display update. However, we have a problem. And that is if we look at the sale view model and we come up here to our load products, well, load products gets that from our product endpoint, get all. And that's a list of product model, not product display model. So we have to do a conversion here. Now, we could do a conversion using link. The problem with that is it's slow. And we really don't want to if we can avoid it. And there's other ways of doing this. And the way that I've chosen to do is AutoMapper. AutoMapper is a tool that is designed for this. And if you actually go and read the description on their main page, why is AutoMapper even a thing? What it talks about is the fact that we need to have model transformations, especially between layers. Because every time a model moves through a layer, it may have to be transformed because we may be adding, changing, or manipulating how that model is designed. And that's where AutoMapper comes into play. Its job is to take the data from one model and move it over to a different model where the two models are close to the same thing or at least hold the same data. And so we're going to be using the very easiest of settings in AutoMapper because AutoMapper can do transformations where the names are different, but it does take a little more mapping. But in our case, it's going to be very, very simple because the names are the same. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to close all this out, and we're going to add a reference in our desktop UI. I'm going to add a reference by managing NuGet packages. Go to Browse and search for AutoMapper. And this tool has been around for a long time. Now, you need to note that older versions, so if you look at older versions of tutorials, AutoMapper has changed significantly since then. So make sure that if you're looking for tutorials on AutoMapper, that you look at the latest tutorials. Older ones use older techniques that are no longer used. So we're going to install latest version, which right now is 8.1.1. And once that's installed, we can close this out. And we're going to add AutoMapper to our dependency injection system. Now the first thing you do with AutoMapper, and I'm going to do it right in here in the configure method. This configure method is getting a little big and it's doing a couple different things. I might want to add a different way of doing this, but for now, I think I'm okay. And that is, the first thing I'm going to do is configure AutoMapper. So I'm going to start with a var config equals new mapper configuration. Control dot to add the using AutoMapper. And then I'm going to say CFG for config, the arrow function, and then our curly braces. Let's say CFG dot create map. And what this does, it says, okay, what the source is and what the destination is. So in this case, the source is going to be product model, and the destination is product display model. So control dot to add that using statement. And then open and close my parens and a semicolon. And then CFG dot create map. And this is going to be my cart item model. And this is the one where we don't have to have this map because, right now at least, because we don't have any mapping that we need to do for cart item model. But I'm going to add it in case we need it later. Cart item display model. So what this does is it says, okay, in AutoMapper, it's going to know at the very beginning, it's going to know how to map a product model over to a product display model. And we do this at the start of our a configuration, now we need to create an actual IMapper. So let's do a var mapper equals config.createMapper. And so that takes the configuration and it creates a mapper, which is what the actual mapping system is. Okay, so it's going to take all these and map them out. Now we have that, we can add it to our dependency injection system. So we can say container.instance and mapper. And what that'll do is it will put an instance, it'll put this in into our container. Now, if you want to map it over with a specific type, you would say, okay, here's the type to map it to. But since this is IMapper, that's what the type is for mapper, therefore, I don't have to say IMapper here because it already knows that it's an IMapper based on the type of variable. So I don't have to include that. It's kind of redundant. But that'll put that instance in as one specific instance, otherwise known as a singleton, really. Because whenever we ask for an IMapper, it's going to get that same mapper. It's not going to create a duplication of that instance. It's going to return the exact same instance, which is what a singleton does. That's the same thing we're doing with our container itself, actually. Okay, so now we have an IMapper present. So we have this configuration created and mapped out, and now that instance of the mapper, we've added that to our container. So now we can come over to our sales view model and add, it's going to go off the page, so let's put a second line here and say IMapper control dot for adding the using statement. And we'll say IMapper mapper. I copy this and come up here, paste it in, and just put an underscore in front of mapper. So mapper equals mapper. And so now we got that IMapper instance in our sales view model. Now before we do anything else, let's do this. Let's change all of our items from product model to product display model in our current document. That's going to change everywhere that product model was to product display model. We'll do our control dot to add that using statement. And then everywhere we have cart item model, we want it to be cart item display model. And we'll do all 6 instances in that current document. So now we've changed everything over, except we have this problem right here. We've got this list of product model, and we're trying to pass it into a binding list of product display model, which doesn't work. Except we can say var products equals underscore mapper dot map. And then our mapper is going to say, okay, we're going to map something. Well, what are we going to map? Well, you'd think it would be our product display model, but actually it's a list of product display model. That's what we're mapping. And we're passing in our product list. Like so. That's all I did. So mapper, map something. Here's the destination format I want it in. Now notice I didn't map a list of product display model. AutoMapper is intelligent enough to say, okay, list, well, a list of what? And it says product display model. Okay, I can do that. I know what product display model is. Therefore, this list over here, each one of these is probably a product model. And it checks, and sure enough, they are. And so it's going to map each one individually and put the results into a list and return that list over to products. And now I can use that products as my display, product display model. Let's see how this works. Let's run this, and once the WPF app pops up and the API starts, I'll hit log in. Now, notice quantity is 10. It's kind of small, but quantity is 10. I'm going to add 1 to the cart. Notice the quantity is now 9. I add another thing to the cart. The quantity over here is 2. The quantity over here is 8. Now, the one thing we didn't do is we didn't take out that hack. So let's do that. The hack is right here. Let's take that out. Make sure it still works. So once the WPF app starts, we log in. Okay, 10. Let's just say 5 for now. Notice 5 over here, 5 over here. Add 1 more, 6, and 4. So now our updates work correctly. So it's refreshing based upon the model inside the list being changed where it wasn't before. So that's really all there is to very, very basic AutoMapper. Now, again, you might twitch at the idea that we have this cart item display model and product display model where we have something very, very similar to what we have in our library. And you might say, well, why didn't you just change your library? Well, this is all about display information. This notify a property change, that's all about display. The model down here isn't about display at all. And in fact, the model down here, we have this display text. I'm tempted to take that off entirely because that really is just about display. And I think that that's probably appropriate to do. We probably shouldn't have that in our library. Our libraries just care about this is the data. It doesn't care about how you're displaying the data or how you're using the data. It's just saying this is the data I got from the API. And so we don't have to have anything display related in our library. That way, each display can choose how they work with the data. So in my WPF application, I do have the concept of this the iNotify property changed. But maybe in my WPF app, or my MVC app, I won't need that. So why should I have an event firing off that I don't need? Or maybe I'll have it, but I won't have it on just quantity in stock. I'll have it on is taxable as well. Or maybe all of the things, because I am making changes to all the different things. It all depends on how your display wants to use that model. And so that's why we have display-specific models. We're talking about MVC, Model View Controller. One of the things is model. But MVC, those three things together are the user interface. It's the same with MVVM, Model, View, View Model. Those three things combine into the user interface layer, even though model sounds like something lower down the chain. And this is the reason why, is because you modify things to fit the display that you're using. So now we have this idea of AutoMapper, and right now it's fairly simple. We just have two things that we can map, the product model and the cart item model, over to our display models. In the future, this might grow, and I might even create a separate method here. I probably will. Let's just do that right now. So private void configure AutoMapper, like so. And then what we'll do is we will pass all of this into here. And then at the last, return, I have to return output. So let's change this to output. And I know it said outputter. Let's just change it back. There we go. Whoops. iMapper. And now we can take all this code out and just say configure AutoMapper. Okay, so now the configure method isn't doing the work of configuring AutoMapper and the dependency injection container. It's just doing the DI container, and it's calling out to configure AutoMapper for the AutoMapper configuration, which also means we go back to modify this and add more configuration. We know exactly where to go, the AutoMapper, to add things to the AutoMapper. Okay, so with that, let's do a little bit of cleanup now that we have this working. First, I'm going to go to my changes, and let's add these changes. So we'll stage them, make sure everything is saved. And the reason I'm doing this now is because this is a good stopping point or a good pause point in my code because we completed a task. So I'm going to commit this even though we're not done with this video. And it's good to always look over this and make sure that things are the way you expect them to be. And the one thing I see in here is app.config has changed. But I didn't actually go in and configure app.config. So what changed? So I can right click on it and say compare with unmodified. And right there, the tax rate actually has an extra space in there. Interesting. Not sure why that changed, but at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt anything. But that's the difference in that file. So when you're looking over your changes and you see something weird like that, just make sure you look it over and make sure that you know why. Packages.config, if you're not familiar, that's where the NuGet packages are. And so there you go. There's the NuGet package right there for AutoMapper has been added. And it targets .NET 4.7.2. Okay, so that all looks good. So let's commit this. So let's give this a name. Let's call this update cart quantities and say add AutoMapper and iNotify property changed. INPC is a common acronym for iNotify property changed. So add AutoMapper and INPC to enable cart quantity changes to be reflected. All right, we'll commit staged, but not actually push it. And now we're ready to move on to the next thing, which is right now this, let's go over to our views and look. The button for remove from cart doesn't actually do anything. So that remove from cart. So let's do something with that. So we have remove from cart. Let's enable that. And the first thing we need to do to enable that is we have this can remove from cart, which right now we need to check to make sure that the something's selected. So how do we know what is selected? Well, if we go back to actually our sales view and look at remove from cart, it should say can remove from cart. So if we come over here to, let's close out the ones we don't need. Let's look for can remove from cart. Oh, I'm sorry. Nope, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm forgetting what I'm doing here. So add to cart, we have the idea of something selected over here. So we have this selected item, which is selected product. So the cart, we don't have a selected item. So let's do that. Let's add this selected item. Let's just copy what we have here and come over to our cart and add that. And selected cart item. And this is can remove from cart. So whenever something is selected here, we can remove from the cart. So that's what the selected cart item will do for us. Now let's go down to our can remove from cart. And we're going to mirror what we have with the can add to cart. So we don't care about the item quantity. We just care if there is something selected. That's all I really care about with our can remove from cart. If selected cart item is not equal to null, output equals true. So with that, let's start just with this. Let's start up and make sure that, in fact, that button does turn or get enabled when something is selected. So right now it's grayed out. If I add to cart, still grayed out. If I select this, it's not updating this to make sure that we can remove from cart. Let's find out why by coming here and put our breakpoint. And let's add something, and we select something, nothing's happening. Let's come up to our selected cart item. All right. Is never assigned to, that's okay. Should be okay. Right there. This is where copy and paste bites you. It's not okay because I'm assigning selected cart item or value to selected product instead of selected cart item. Now that should work. Let's verify it by hitting start again. This is why you have to test your code and why also copy and paste might not be the best solution. In fact, I discourage it, especially in new developers. All right, it's grayed out. We select something, still grayed out. Interesting, let's find out why. Let's put our breakpoint there. Item. So it should be whenever this list box changes, we put this selected item into the selected cart item. Now let's make sure I spelled it right. Selected cart item. That looks right. And let's compare it to what we have up here. Selected item is the selected product. Okay, that's in the list box like before. It's in the list box, selected cart item. I'm going to copy this to just make sure. Selected cart item, I'm going to paste it. Doesn't seem to change anything. It should be that this gets fired. Let's put our breakpoint up here in selected product just to make sure that, in fact, this one's firing and hitting the breakpoint so we know that this one should be as well. This is where debugging comes into play. We have to figure these things out. I hit login, and right away we have selected item is null, so therefore output should be false. It's still null. So now we gotta select something. It should fire off that breakpoint. It does. The selected product has changed. The new value has a value, and it's the 10-inch skillet. So that's good. We can hit continue. And now if I say add to cart and I select it, nothing's happening. Nothing is changing over here. And I don't see anything in my, I see an output exception right here. Aha! Cannot convert item cart item display model. Selected item not supported. Cannot convert cart item display model. Okay, so it looks like the reason why is because this is not a product model, it's a cart item display model. And I should have known that. This is again why you gotta be very careful with, yell at me again. Let's change the right one this time. Selected cart item should be a cart item display model and a cart item display model. Now that we have that in place, let's take our breakpoints off. I could just disable them, but I usually take them off. That's why we had that red outline on that box probably. It's grayed out. It's not grayed out. Now you got that figured out, got that issue straightened out, and we can go back over. Now notice I looked at my output window and looked at those exceptions and said, oh, that's what that exception was. Because WPF is throwing an exception, but because it's a display exception, it's not actually crashing my application. It's just kind of eating that exception. So now let's stop this. Now that we have the can remove from cart enabled, we've got to figure out what we're going to do when we actually hit the button. Right now we're just notifying a property changed. But up here in our add to cart, we grab the cart item display model, which cart item display model has a product in it and a quantity. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to grab the selected product first, and I'm sorry, selected cart item, and say if you have a quantity greater than 1. So if selected cart item dot quantity in cart is greater than 1, then what we're going to do is say selected cart item dot quantity in cart minus equals 1. So subtract 1 from it. Now we also at the same time will need to change the quantity of the product inside it. So selected cart item dot product dot, and we come down here to quantity in stock, and we need to add 1. Remember that we changed that quantity in stock as well, so it reflects in the other list. Now, if, so an else here, so if we don't have a quantity greater than 1, then what we're going to do is we're going to remove this item from the cart. So we can say selected cart item dot product dot quantity in stock plus equals 1, which we got some redundancy here, so we got to fix that. But then we can say cart dot remove selected cart item. So that's what we're going to do. Now the reason I still add 1 of the quantity in stock is because we need to again increment that by 1, but this time instead of decrementing the selected cart quantity, we just remove the entire thing. But since we have this redundancy here, I can cut this out and paste it up top. And then I can remove it from both places since it happens either way. Now, the one thing we don't have is a check for what if the quantity is already 0. It shouldn't happen, but if it does, what do we do? So let's just make sure it's not null, which it shouldn't be, and the quantity is greater than 0. Now we can do that. We are doing it not null here. So we can say if it's not null and selected cart item, we'll do the question mark thing, dot product dot quantity in stock is greater than 0. That's our check now to make sure that we don't have any cases where there's a zero quantity or less in the cart. It shouldn't happen in any circumstances. But just in case it does, we'll make sure we handle it so that you can't remove it from the list. Because if you remove it from the list and we add 1 to the quantity in stock, we could actually have more quantity in stock than we started with. Again, this should never happen. If it does, you've got a bug in the system. But let's just add that in to be doubly sure. Let's try this out and make sure our logic is correct. All right, so we have a skillet, we have 2 skillets, we have a fluffy bath towel, we have a home repair kit, we have another skillet. Notice it's not moving the skillet down since I added a new one. Okay, so now we have 7 skillets, we have 19 bath towels, and we have 49 home repair kits. Let's say we don't need 3 skillets, we need 2. So I remove 1, it says 2, and it says 8. And the total has been updated as well. Remove it again, remove it one last time, and now there's no skillet over here, and there's 10 back over here. So this does seem to work. It does seem to handle adding and removing just fine. Okay, so now we have add and remove to our cart. I think that's probably good for tonight. So we did 2 things kind of related. The biggest one, the most important thing was we added that I notify a property change on our models. We actually had to add new models in order to add that I notify property changed. So expand out this property with the 2 calls to property changed, which triggered that event. Caliber Micro listens for this event and says, okay, something's changed, therefore I will refresh the screen. Notice we're not getting gung-ho about saying, well, everything will notify of property change, because we don't want to fire that event off if we don't have to. So we add those 2 models, and then we needed to add AutoMapper, which was just that NuGet package, and then in Bootstrapper, adding the configuration to map out those 2 models. Once we did that, we can just call that mapping, which was right up here, and map one type over to another, and then use that type from then on. So that was a big thing, and then we just added again that remove from cart, which we'll go ahead and make sure everything's saved, and we'll add that as well. Add remove from cart functionality. I think that stands on its own, so we can actually just leave it just like that. Say commit staged. Let's go over to our sync. We have nothing on fetch, therefore we can just do a push. We don't have to do a pull first. If you had something first, make sure you do a pull and then do a push. Or you can hit sync, which does both. It does a pull first and then a push. So I'll push those 2 up to the server. Again, if you're a Patreon subscriber, make sure you go over and get this latest source code. This will be in there. All right, with that, that's all for this video. In the next video, I think what we're going to do is one last video on WPF, which is right now, if we look at this shell view,